Hello and welcome to On Point. I'm Strawman Osom. Today we look at the controversy surrounding 43 college students missing in Mexico. On September 26th, about 100 students were traveling north to a protest in Mexico City when they were stopped and apparently kidnapped by local police in Iguala. Most of those students were enrolled in the Ayotzinapa Teachers College, a school with liberal views known to contradict those of the current administration. Some believe that this is why the students were targeted. Others say that the mayor of Iguala ordered the hit by police to stop the students from protesting at an event organized to bolster his wife's political career. On October 29th, the parents of missing students met with Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto, who reassured them that the government was searching for their children. On November 4th, authorities arrested the former mayor of Iguala and his wife and charged them in connection with the murders. On November 7th, the Mexican Attorney General told parents that officials had arrested a group of drug cartel members who admitted to have murdered the students and then incinerated their bodies. Parents have been reluctant to accept the official version of events and have requested a third-party group from Argentina to examine the remains. On December 7th, Mexican officials said they'd found a bone fragment of one of the missing 43, 19-year-old Alexander Mora Venancio. It was the first discovery confirmed by the Argentinian group, and the government claims there have been no further developments or discoveries. On Point's Laura Camelo has more.
Thank you, Strongman. Here to talk about the 43 Ayotzinapa students, I am joined with Armando Gudiño, Policy Manager of the Drug Policy Alliance, which is the largest nation-leading organization promoting drug policies, Eileen Truax, journalist, freelance writer for several Spanish-language publications and author of the book Dreamers, and Dr. Jorge Garcia, Professor of Chicano Studies here at CSUN, and also former Dean of the College of Humanities at CSUN. Thank you all for joining me. I want to start off with an overall question, and we'll begin with you, Eileen. Recently, forensic experts have identified one of the missing students in a remote place in Cocula, Guerrero. This shows a partiality confirmation of what the statements say. What are your thoughts on this? How accurate is this?
Well, that's a very partial confirmation of what happened there. As we know, we have 43 missing students. Now they have identified one of them, but there's a lot of questions about that finding and that identification. Let's remember that they disappeared, they were kidnapped by municipal police on September the 26th. It took several weeks for the authorities, for the federal authorities, to find out some clues that took them to that place in Cocula, Guerrero. At the beginning, they stated that the 43 of them may be there, but that certain procedures were applied in the area, so the remains were not easy to identify. They burned it down. They took the remains and took them to the river. And after several weeks, we find that there's a piece of a bone inside a plastic bag that they found in the river, that it's part of the body of one of the missing students. The Argentinian forensic team, that is the team in charge of the DNA identification, the parents of the students agreed on having these teams doing the work, have stated that yes, it seems like this bone is part of the remains of one of the students, but they have been very clear on the fact that they didn't find the remains directly in there. They were not there when the authorities took the plastic bag out of the river. So they are just saying, okay, this is part of the body of these students, but we cannot assure that it was in here in this area when they found it. So, and it's one of the students. We are looking for other 42. There's a lot of questions around this, and I think the main problem is the lack of trust in the authorities and in any version that they can give us regarding this issue.
And Dr. Garcia, what are your thoughts on the findings?
Well, what I think we can have some faith in terms of the scientific evidence is that this bone fragment and tooth do come from one of the students. Everything after that is up in the air because even the parents are saying this, the plantaron el hueso, that it was put there. That's not where anything happened or anything like what they said happened. What this all points to, I think, is the long time collusion between, politicians at municipal, at state, at federal level with various groups of organized crime in Mexico. It points to the lack of clarity, the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability, which leads to basically people cannot accept at face value what is being said because it's, one of my uncles used to say that, they feed us atole con el dedo. He says, well, we're at the point now where we don't even get the atole. It's el puro dedo that they're giving us. So we cannot, I think, have any reasonable confidence or faith in what we're being told until we have more concrete evidence of what has happened, what is going on, and you put it in this context of the horrible situation in Mexico where there is complete and total impunity. An example of that, I think, to make us get an idea of what has been going on, we're finally getting a taste of that here, where now we see people realizing that you can be gunned down here by police and all they have to say is, I felt threatened, and they have impunity. Well, that kind of impunity has existed for decades in Mexico. Coming out of the revolution, this thing is 100 years old. This collusion, narco traffic, it's nothing new. What I think is people are finally saying, yeah, basta, this is enough. We've reached to the point where it's just too much. And not only that, the brutality of what's going on, to do that to human beings, to disintegrate them. Or when they're picking up, some of the other missing, when we find the bodies, the faces have been stripped of flesh. What the heck is that about?
Armando, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I totally agree with both Eileen and Dr. Garcia. I think this speaks to the complete and utter failure of the government in Mexico. It speaks to the irresponsibility and what is, without a doubt, a failed system that not only has failed the students, the parents, and all of the people who are working very hard to find answers, but ultimately has failed the country as a whole. I think at this point, time and time again, the government has demonstrated an inability to not only conduct the most basic of investigation, but something we already knew coming into this, and we've known for quite some time, and that is there is a lack of transparency, a lack of accountability, and ultimately there has to be those in government, if not the government in its entirety, be held responsible, if not by the people of Mexico, but maybe even by an international body. So, I think it's only left more questions, and it's exposed the government for what it is, which is a total failure.
I want to go back to the students and with the government. Dr. Garcia, can you explain a little bit of the history of the Ayotzinapa students?
We only have a half an hour, right? Okay.
Well,
well, we're dealing with a escuela normal rural. And I would just go back to, everybody looks at 1968, Tlatelolco. And these students were going to gather in commemoration of that event, of the massacre of students and supporters of students in 1968. Well, you make the connection, I think, to the fact that 10 years earlier, 1958, there was the Movimiento Magistral Revolucionario, which came out of the National Normalista. And there are ties, some of the people involved. The fact that, just the other day, we have the commemoration of Lucio Cabañas Barrientos. He spent part of his training there in that school. He was a rural school teacher. The rural school teachers have this long history in Mexico. Otilio Montaño and others who worked with Emiliano Zapata writing the Plan de Ayala. Everybody says Zapata, Plan de Ayala. No, there were a group of people, including these rural school teachers, who were putting together that program. There was a wonderful song in the 68 student movement days in Latin America talking about que vivan los estudiantes que son la levadura. And that's the papel, the role that those rural school teachers saw. Now, some of them went off and became rural caciques, but this rural school is a agencia de fomento.
So, to touch that base, are these students seen as a threat, or why these students?
You know, that's one of the mysteries of this one. Why these 43 and why did they hit them so hard? Yes, they were seen as a threat, but we don't know the whole story yet. I mean, whether it's involved in the disruption of the mayor's wife's party or whatever, I mean, that could have been the spark. But there's clearly this general setting of the deteriorating conditions. The government has no legitimacy anymore, and people are looking, especially in Guerrero. This is where we see the founding of the community police about 20 years ago, and they're going back to another form of government. They're rejecting mainstream Mexico and its government and saying, we have an ancient way of governing ourselves through councils of residents. And you see that there's at least 20 municipios in Guerrero that are now not under government control, but under the control of the comunitarios. And I think this poses a threat to those who are in charge. It poses a threat to the narcotraficantes, because that's the stimulus that has forced people, citizens, men and women, to take up guns to defend themselves. No hay seguridad, there's no security.
Eileen, you were just recently in Mexico. Can you tell us a little bit about this experience, and what did you see, or what do you see between the common people and the government? Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
This is the first time that I see a topic staying in the front pages for more than 2 months. This is very interesting because, as you know, many of the mainstream media in Mexico are co-opted by the government. They depend on the government's money to survive. Most of the advertising in those papers, especially and also on TV stations, is by the government agencies, so they depend on those monies to work. But yet, they had to give a space to this topic, to the Ayotzinapa thing, to the mobilizations in their front pages. And this is something, this shows something, that people are tired, and this is not something that they're gonna talk about for 1, 2, 3 weeks, and after that they're gonna stop. This thing is building up. And I think it's been very important that the parents of the students have been visiting certain cities. I was in one of the demonstrations, Mexico City. The parents were talking, and Dr. Garcia was mentioning something really important here. Many of the parents of these students are part of the policías comunitarias in Guerrero. These are groups of local residents that have created a community police to protect themselves, since they know that the municipal police are infiltrated by the narco. So we are talking about a society, a community that are very aware on what their rights are and that they have been violated for a long time. This is a community that is used to fight. That may explain also why these 43 students. But the fact that they are going to Mexico City and other cities to talk to the people, to share with them not only the cases of their disappeared children, but what are the situation in their communities, what challenges they have to face every day having the narco installed in there, I think has helped to make the communities in the big cities more aware about the situation. I think we're going to hear about this for a long time.
I want to, if you can take a look at this graph. These numbers are from the government, and this says, I have a graph here showing, according to the State Department, it shows that since President Felipe Calderón launched the war on drug cartels, more than 100,000 people have been killed and more than 22,000 reported missing. How accurate is this? Is there something missing?
You know,
numbers are off.
I mean, I suspect that there's certainly a lot more. I mean, first of all, you know, starting with the administration of Calderón and the strategy, you know, we got to look at it, and we got to take a minute to look at this and look at the broader picture. First and foremost, starting with Calderón administration, decided to take a militaristic approach in dealing with a domestic issue at the hands or at the encouragement of American foreign policy. In there lies one of the first roots of this problem, and that has subsequently led to the murder, disappearance, and killing. And if you include the collateral consequences, those affected families, children, extended families of those who have been disappeared, we're talking people in the millions. And when you have on the backdrop of this, issues like neoliberal economic reforms that do away with Article 27 of the Mexican Constitution, which did away with the land rights program and created an entire generation of people, landless people, who became the fodder for the cartels to now utilize. You have a cocktail that's being mixed that has led to a total breakdown in society in Mexico, a lot of which has been at the hands of American foreign policy and the insistence of fighting a drug war that has failed, because since the inception of the war on drugs, you have seen all indexes related to whether it's usage, distribution, sales, transportation, trafficking, all have increased. And at one point or another, you have to sit there and ask yourself, how's that working out for you? Which is in part why in this side of the country, we have to take responsibility for what's going on in Mexico. We have to take responsibility for the disappearance and murder and literally genocide of an entire generation of Mexicanos south of the border, and start looking at ways that we can be held responsible. And one of those ways has to be if we can't find the proverbial fairy godmother who can do away with drugs and drug problems, and if we can readily accept that the war on drugs has and continues to fail, then we have to look at alternatives. And one of those alternatives has to be potentially taxing and regulating marijuana on this side of the border.
I want to touch also about the United States, which has spent about $3 billion to fund the so-called war on drugs. Can you explain a little bit about this? I would like all of you to.
Well, it has its roots and origins in Plan Merida, which has been a transnational economic plan that seeks to provide support, direct financial support, assistance, weapons, again, taking a militaristic approach to addressing issues and within the boundaries of a domestic nation. And what it's done, it's fed the military machine in places like Mexico, Central America, and South America. One of the big fundamental problems with that is that there isn't transparency in how and where this money is being used. Secondly, this model is in fact modeled after some of the drug trafficking wars that were fought out in the Caribbean and the eastern part of the country, where if the wisdom, the infinite wisdom of these models had more to do with the idea of chopping the head off of those in control and having the cartels wither away, a model that failed in places like Mexico, because when you did that, all you ended up with was a fragmented system of cartels that was able to infiltrate at the local level and expand on the corruption, make that corruption grow. And, for 70 years, Mexico was under one system, one corrupt system. And now you have this, at the expense of democracy, this whole variety of microsystems, all of which are being corrupted at the micro level by cartels, in part being funded both by, the consumer nation that is America and the money coming back, right?
I want to touch another base. I want to talk about the leadership involvement of the President Enrique Peña Nieto. In one of his statements, he said, which I quote, "Superar el momento doloroso," which means overcome the painful moments. What did the parents feel with such a statement?
I think they felt insulted, not only the parents, but the whole society. I think that particular statement says a lot about what kind of government do we have right now. With the return of the PRA to the government in Mexico, what we have seen is that they didn't learn anything. They were ruling the country for 70 years. They were out for 12 years. And they're coming back with a lot of cynicism, with a lot of strength based on authoritarianism. And they didn't realize that the society has changed during these years. So what I see is a president that is very concerned about his image outside of the country. That supérenlo means that please stop talking about this, because if you remember, 6 months ago, the Time magazine gave me the cover with my picture on it saying "Saving Mexico." And it's been a lot of effort from me to have messages like that sent outside the country, and now you people in Mexico are ruining that. So please, right now, stop it, supérenlo, and let me keep going with my international policy that is going to become a very successful thing for this country. Fortunately, I think outside, they're receiving a message also from inside the country. You have seen the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, a lot of mainstream media outside
And
Mexico.
also
Yes.
Twitter.
And of course, yes, social media, but even mainstream media, which is important because it seems like that's the main target for this administration to focus on outside of the country. You cannot stop something going on like this for this long and coming from that many people in the country. So that only speaks about how far is this administration from their people.
Eileen, I want you and all of the guests. This is Twitter, and I put the hashtag Ya me cansé too. Why is it too? What happened in this situation when it was originally Ya me cansé? How is the government partaking in this?
Well, as you know, the Ya me cansé was brought up by the general attorney in Mexico, and that means that he was tired of talking about the issue with the press. This came up in a press conference, so immediately people on social media converted that in a hashtag, saying, okay, if you are tired and you're the person who are supposed to make justice in this case, how do you think we feel? The hashtag was very successful. A lot of people was over that, putting videos on, covering the protests and the demonstrations, and suddenly the hashtag went down. As you know, there's not much agencies that have the power to do that, but of course it was blamed directly to the government in a moment that they were interested in stopping a little bit the noise coming from that movement. So, well, we created the Ya me cansé too, and I say we, part of the society, journalists, activists, people involved covering, following this issue. There's a journalist that mentioned, okay, if it's needed, we're going to have the Ya me cansé 43. It doesn't matter how many times they put it down, we're going to put it up. And I think this administration is learning about that. I'm very surprised that they were not aware about the powers of social media in the public opinion, and especially in the international public opinion.
But it also speaks to the level of arrogance.
Yeah.
The level of arrogance and utter disrespect. I mean, the audacity to put something like that up there. You know, there should have been even a greater response. I hope the response continues just on that alone, because they need to be held accountable at all levels, including, you know, microtechnology and web-based efforts.
Dr. Jorge Garcia.
Social media, you know, obviously all of us have seen the tremendous impact and the change that it's done, because people are responding directly and it's widespread. A cartoon came out recently, I believe it was La Jornada, had obviously a couple of Mexicanos, you know, poor Mexicans, and El Copetón is there, Peña Nieto's there, and he says, you know, hay que aguantar esto. He says, porque tienen que aguantar los 4 años que me quedan. He says, I've got 4 more years, you know. Hold on, you know. And then people just take that and run with it, and it helps with changing the perspective and changing the worldview of so many people.
The last question, I mean, speaking to some people here in the marches, you know, some say they want a revolution. What is the answer right now for Mexico? What does it need? Armando, we can start and end with Jorge.
Wow, that's a heavy question. That's a very complicated one. I, for one, don't think that, you know, the days of you know, gun in hand, running down the street style revolution is feasible. That said, we do have examples in which, in other parts of the world, you know, El Pueblo has, you know, gone to the streets, has insisted upon change through the use of you know, social media, among others. perfect example are the Arab Springs that we saw on the other side of the planet. I think what we need is to have citizens and residents on both sides of the border collaborate. We need to come to a consensus on perhaps leadership of the movement, but most importantly begin to question the sources of funding for some of these plans that are ultimately generating the type of problems that are in Mexico and others, including funding like Plan Mérida.
Eileen?
I think this is a very good moment for una revolución de las conciencias, for change the way Mexican people think about their government. For several years, they have thought that once a politician gets a spot in the government, they cannot move it anymore. Even that cartoon that Dr. Garcia mentioned, les faltan 4 años, still 4 years left. For some reason, Mexican people don't understand that if you put someone in certain spot, you can't remove him if they don't deliver. The impeachment idea in Mexico is something that looks very unfamiliar, something that is not possible to make. It is possible. It is possible to remove elected officials if they're not working. And I think this is a good moment for the Mexican people to understand that they can do that. They can make their politicians accountable. They, now with the scandal of the very expensive house of the First Lady of Mexico, they're starting to realize that there's a lot in there that is not working, and they have the power just to jeopardize the way these things are working now. So maybe that's the kind of revolution that we need.
And Dr. Jorge, just
Okay, if people are calling for his resignation, constitutionally he can resign, but when he resigns, that resignation goes to Congress, and they have the option of accepting or rejecting. The head of PRI, which controls Congress, has already said they will not accept his resignation if he tenders it. Now, that means the extra constitutional means, whatever they are, must continue.
Thank you all for being on the show today.
Thanks for
Thank you.
A boy born in Joplin, Missouri was fascinated by anything with wheels and a motor. The odds of him winning both the Daytona 500 and the Brickyard 400 in the same year, 1 in 195 million. The odds of a child being diagnosed with autism, 1 in 68. I'm Jamie McMurray, and my niece has autism. Learn more at autismspeaks.org/signs.
No more pencils, no more books,
No more teachers, dirty looks.
school's out for summer.
What this place needed was better graduation rates. So we worked with schools like Henry Ford High, and now they're up 18%. To help us do more good this year, go to unitedway.org, because great things happen when we live united.
Thank you for watching On Point. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook by searching CSUN On Point. You can watch us on channel LA36 Saturday mornings at 8:30 and Sunday mornings at 11:30. You can also hear the show on KCSN 88.5 FM on Sunday mornings at 5:30. For all of us here at On Point, I'm Armando.